Thank you for joining us. I'm Shaylee Santiago, and I'm presenting today on authentic voice in response to text on Make a Difference PD, hashtag MadPD. You can tweet at me at HSESLTeacher. And briefly, some outcomes for the session today. Participants will evaluate the degree of authenticity and engagement in text responses, and participants will explore social media tools for connecting with texts. I have a couple of friends who are here with me live today to help out during the presentation. So I've got Jamie Cardwell and Brenda Daisy. Jamie, do you want to start and just tell us briefly who and where you are? Because yours is kind of interesting.
Sure. I'm Jamie Cardwell. I'm a curriculum coordinator in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. And I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri. And so I have been here. This is my first year here in Dubai, and I work at a U.S. curriculum school, but all of my staff, I'm the only American certified teacher on staff. So I work with a very diverse population of teachers and students, and my job is basically just to support the department heads, and then as well as then they support all of the teachers. So it's a K through 12 school using U.S. curriculum located in Dubai.
Awesome. And Jamie and I have presented at TESOL a time or two. Did you say you were from Missouri originally?
Yeah, I'm from St. Louis, yeah.
Great. All right, and Brenda.
Yes, hi, my name is Brenda Daisy, and I'm currently serving as ESOL Program Lead in the West Des Moines Community School District. I serve in that role half-time, and I also teach 6th grade English language learners at Crestview School of Inquiry in West Des Moines.
And Brenda's having a little video issue, so we're just going to look at her avatar. And by the way, I see Carol Salva responded that they can see us, and it's working, so great. And thanks for that feedback, Carol. Appreciate it. All right, so my background, I was the ESL teacher at the high school in Ames, Iowa, where I live. And then a couple of years ago, I shifted into a different role as instructional coach, specifically for ESL teachers. And along the way there, part of what I'm sharing today comes from kind of that time when I was in the classroom and what I was doing with my students around reading, and then a little bit into the transition into when I was a coach working with some teachers, and as well as my own personal development and online learning since then. So the question that came up for me, the whole thing that this Make a Difference presentation is centered around, is the idea about how do we get students to authentically engage with text and with the books they're reading. And for me personally, it kind of started with this quote that I feel very true about from J.K. Rowling, that if you don't like to read, you haven't found the right book yet. And so I took it on myself as the teacher to figure out different ways to promote books and reading with my students. So that was kind of the starting point for me on this journey. And so a couple different things that I did, I'll show you a few examples. I started off by posting what I was currently reading. Also, Goodreads, I was using that quite a bit. Some of that led into having students recommend books. And part of the way I would get their recommendations was through a reading survey. So let me briefly show you a couple examples. These are some of my currently reading examples. This is the bulletin board behind my desk at school. And so I'd have the cover of the book I was reading at that point in time, and then the recent ones down below. And so across the year, the school year, you could see the collection as it was growing. Then I also added to my signature line, and actually this is my current signature line because I still haven't quite finished the book. So I do change it out periodically, but just putting on there, which book I'm currently reading. So just trying to kind of promote or raise awareness about different books. Then Goodreads, and these are a couple examples from students, and I'm going to talk more about students using Goodreads a little later on. But one of my students posted about this book, Tyrell, that he'd read. Man, this book was off the hook, is how he started his little summary about the book. And then he also did one on the hair in the elephant's trunk, and the fun thing about that is the author actually responded to him, Jan Coates. So there was a little bit of interaction and back and forth, and sometimes the teacher could post a question. So here's one of my colleagues. She posted a question to the student about the review that he'd written. But what I was finding with Goodreads was usually it was more about like kind of your own thoughts on the books, and there wasn't a lot of interaction or back and forth to go to a deeper level of talking about the book. So here's the student picks, and actually this one, I had a new dog and she got a hold, I don't know if you can tell, but she chewed a couple library books. And so I had to pay for them, and so they became part of my classroom library, but I called them Kiora's Pics. So here's the picture of my dog on the porch where the deed was done, so to speak. But I would do a similar thing and have students put a book up like on the tray of the whiteboard after they'd read it if they were recommending that others read it. And like I mentioned, one way I would get those recommendations, besides them just telling me, I created a reading survey. This is one I used about this time of year, several years ago, as we were headed into summer. And so I was promoting that they would do a reading challenge on Goodreads over the summer, and how many books were they going to read, and how much time and what places would they be reading books. And so trying to get them to think about setting some goals around the number of books they would read, and also which books they were interested in and which ones they would recommend to me. Actually, interestingly enough, as I was looking back at the survey data from my real students, I realized one of my students recommended a book, The True Story of a Part-Time Indian, I think is it, Alexi Sherman, and I haven't read that one yet. So in getting ready for this presentation, I was like, oh, I gotta take him up on that recommendation of a book. But again, all this it was just really about promoting, and it wasn't going as deep as what I was looking for students to do. So before I go further into the kind of how I took it to the next level, I wanted to pause here and see, and this is where Jamie and Brenda, if you guys want to chime in, that'd be great. What ideas have you used to promote reading in your classroom? And then how would you rate the level of engagement with text that was achieved by your students? And again, if you're watching online, you can respond via Twitter as well, hashtag MadPD, tweet at me at HSESL teacher. Jamie, you want to jump in?
Sure. I think for us here, there's not as strong of a reading culture as I found when I taught back home. And so one of the things we're trying to do is just to promote the idea of just reading. And I've seen a lot with the different teachers and what they've done. So like one of the 5th grade teachers, he also has a space on his wall where he promotes various books, and so kids put their book recommendations on the wall. Sometimes teachers will, the students will be introduced from an excerpt in their actual anthology. I know we're using anthologies here, but so they're exposed to it by that, and then they'll go to the library or they'll go to Borders or whatever and pick it up here. So I would definitely say it's a struggle just to get kids to read here, because it's just not a part of their nature. We don't have a sustained reading time. It's not something that's here in the culture. And so it's honestly just a fight to even promote reading in class. But I do see the teachers trying to model it, and I do see some sparks of engagement here and there on their walls.
Awesome. And I like what you were saying about from an anthology, sometimes they get a hint of a book or, just an excerpt of it, and that's enough to kind of ease them to go find it themselves.
Yeah.
Brenda, you want to chime in?
Yes, I heard a great quote recently, and when I can think of the person's name who said it, I want to give that person credit. But the quote was, "Listening comprehension is the ceiling for reading comprehension." So with us, with the co-teachers that I work with and other ESL teachers, we work on read aloud, listening, and allowing students to analyze that text and to get to a deeper understanding by using sometimes their relative strengths of listening with those harder passages, so that decoding doesn't get in the way. One way to do that I'm really excited to start exploring this week actually is listening to podcasts, fiction podcasts, audiobooks, and getting students hooked into something that, they might not be able to decode that text at grade level, but through listening, it hooks them, it hooks their interest. And, you can print off the transcript and they can access that grade level text and then go back and start reading and finding evidence in the text to justify their ideas and share what they're learning with others.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that, because it reminds me I was going to reference something in this survey. There is a program here in the States over the summer, Audiobooks Sync. They have audiobooks that you can download. They pair 2 together per week. So there's a classic paired with a more recent publication. It runs from Thursday through Wednesday night. Sometime overnight is when it switches books. So like this week, it's Othello, Shakespeare's Othello, and it's paired with Y-O-U. So those two have some pairing. So Audiobooks Sync, later on I'll drop the link in Twitter so that you can join that if you want. I get text reminders and then I can download it to my phone, and I play them using Overdrive Media, which is what my public library has for access to audiobooks as well. So, but these ones you download and you've got the book for free then, as long as you've got storage on your device. So another thing I was promoting with my students over the summertime. Okay, so then I decided that kind of my goal, what I was shooting for with my students, was I wanted a deeper level of interaction and engagement, more discussion from student to other students, so that we could hear their authentic voice coming through. And like Brenda was alluding to, I wanted to be able to really address the Common Core standards and the English language proficiency standards, especially the one about argumentation, where students provide evidence to support their arguments. So that's the second kind of phase of what I've been working to develop. And full disclosure here, I'm not there yet by any means. Not being in the classroom and having my own students currently limits me a little bit in what I can try with experimenting. And so I've worked a little bit with some teachers. So I'll show you an example of that on Goodreads. But then I'm also going to talk about Pinterest and using Booksnaps. And so here's where we're getting to that second objective about using social media tools to try to promote a deeper level of engagement and interaction with text. So these are 2 screenshots from the Goodreads group page that my colleague set up. This is the colleague who kind of took over for me as I was leaving the classroom and shifting into the coaching role. And so she made a group for her class, and you can see there's different things that in a group you can do. You can have discussions that all the group members have access to. You can set up challenges specific to that group. So like the summer reading challenge that my survey was referencing, we could have one about that. We could have our own events. We could have our own bookshelf. So if there are books that we've talked about together in class, I could add those to the bookshelf. And then group comments and topics for kind of keeping the discussion threads organized. Another one, this is Pinterest, shifting to Pinterest. And this example is something that an LChat book club, which is on Twitter, a slow chat. So the 3.0 edition or round of that book chat was about Lester Laminek's Writers Are Readers is the title. And so in that book, he talks about or gives suggestions of different texts to use to talk about different kinds of writing in different genres. And so through Pinterest, I made a collection of all these different books he was referencing, because it's one thing when you see the name and maybe you have experience or you know that particular author, but to me, having a visual of it is just a whole nother level of being able to engage. Also in this, people can comment on the different pins that you make, and they can add suggestions as well. But to me, it still is kind of a surface level. You're not into the specifics of the book. You're not, I mean, you might pull out a quote to put into your comment, but only if you're really focused on doing it that way, right? So then Booksnaps is kind of where I've landed is what I think is maybe a really good way to get students engaged in discussing text. And there's a couple reasons why I like Booksnaps. One is that you can actually cite the text. So in this particular example, up in the upper left, I've got the cover of the book. If you aren't familiar with it, you're going to have a hard time knowing that Wayne Wright is the author because you can't really see. The text is fairly small. So that's one thing that in a later snap, you'll see that I actually have like the full citation for those of us who have written theses and dissertations, right, Jamie?
Yeah.
But I do like that you can add symbols. And so I've got the balance, the scale to represent you need balance. And then you see me, my little Bitmoji. So those are always fun to add in. And here's my thought bubble. Reading instruction alone isn't enough. L's need all 4 domains integrated. And so the picture at the bottom here, of course, is the 4 different domains: reading, writing, listening, and speaking, not in that order, but and then I have an arrow pointing to a specific spot in the text that kind of talks about that balanced approach to literacy. Oh, by the way, this one I made it using Google Draw. So if you have a Google account, you can use Draw. You just take the photo of the front cover, the photo of the page, and then you can import different items to create your own. And then you can download it as a PNG or a JPEG. So you can share it out over Twitter or whatever method is your preferred way to share it. And on the side here, I've got a reference to Tara Martin. She's got a blog. She's kind of the one that I saw using Booksnaps on Twitter. And that's where I learned kind of how to do it. So I highly recommend her information and following her on Twitter. Also, if you put in the hashtag Booksnaps, a bunch of them will come up. Okay, so here's one that I actually did using Snapchat. I am not great with Snapchat, but thank goodness I have a teenager in the house, and she will help me when I'm like, well, how do I make it do whatever it is I'm trying to get it to do at the time, right? So another thing about this one, when you're on your phone, you can actually put in text. So I was able to put the comment about amplifying text through scaffolds instead of simplifying it for L's. And then for this one, to reference where the information is coming from, I just put the title, the U.S. Department of Education Newcomer Toolkit. But again, I don't exactly like that if you aren't familiar with that resource, you're not going to have an easy time finding it. I mean, I guess at the least you can search online. But so that's kind of one downside of how this one's made. Also from your phone, if you're going to share onto Twitter, you can do it straight from Snapchat, but to keep a history of it, I end up downloading it and putting it into where I keep my other photos so that I have a record of it, because I think most snaps, they go away after a certain amount of time. See, that's something I'm still learning about how Snapchat works. One more example, a third book snap. This one I made it using Google Slides. And what I especially like is I was able to put the full reference at the bottom of the slide. And then I added in different elements. And so there's 2 actual different photos, one of me holding the book. This one was another LChat Book Club title, by the way. I can't remember which round of LChat Book Club. And then this on the left side is from the actual text itself. And again, I've added some different Bitmojis for some symbolic connections to what the page was talking about. And then I put in my little chat window, call out window, I think is actually how it's worded in slides, of my comment of kind of why I chose this particular graphic from the book to share out. So in this case, I feel like we're getting a little deeper into some of the interaction and the back and forth discussion. But to kind of summarize, and this is just my initial list of pros and cons, and in a moment I'm going to ask you to kind of chime in what you think as well. But from the 3 different tools I showed you, Goodreads, Pinterest, and Booksnaps, this is sort of where I'm at about how I think the pros and cons weigh out. And as you can probably already tell from my presentation, I'm really hooked on Booksnaps because they're so versatile and you can put in lots of different elements. To me, the one downside is it does take a fair amount of time to create them. And if you're on the side of being a perfectionist, like I tend to be, sometimes you get a little frustrated with how it looks in the end. Like maybe it's not as clear in the text as you wish it were, or whatever, but I'm learning to let go. So let's come to this next slide then, where I'm asking another question and we'll get some interaction from the audience. Those of you who are following along on YouTube, feel free to put stuff in the chat box for us. Are there tools that you'd suggest for promoting authentic engagement with text? Or what are you thinking of some of the ones that I showed? Or are there questions about how to do any of what I've been showing you?
I've used Goodreads to kind of keep track of my own reading, but not to promote authentic engagement. One of the head of our English department does some work through our platform, our online platform called Learn Online. It's a Moodle that's heavily kind of changed for our purposes here, but or heavily edited, I should say. But so she does it through just opening conversations, and then kids can chat about books they're reading. I don't know how much authentic engagement it's really promoting, but I mean, that's something that we're trying, and we don't use any third-party software, so we're a bit limited here with what we're allowed to use, and it's always monitored. So, you know, it's a bit of a struggle. I really like Booksnaps, though, although I do think it'd take me forever to do one of those, but I like it.
The good thing I found is if you've done a Booksnap, that some of the ones I've made, I end up using repeatedly. Like that same idea will come up again. So even the one about reading and the balance between the different language domains for English learners, that's like perennial content, right? It's a discussion that we keep coming back to over and over again. So thankfully, it helps you think about what's the most important thing to make a snap about, and then hopefully that topic comes up in other places and you don't make it to use it just one time.
Yeah. Our Arabic department does a lot of work with authentic text, not only from the Quran as part of like trying to integrate, you know, Islamic education, but then also just practicing Arabic, writing, and connecting back to authentic texts as well in Arabic. So, you know, we struggle so much in English and also in Arabic. So I know our Arabic department is doing quite a bit as well with it.
Interesting. I'm seeing a question from Carol Salva about brand new students engaging, and how would this work for them also? I think for a brand new student, if their English proficiency is still quite limited, I mean, they can do the visuals, they can have the picture from the book. The main thing is, as long as they're able to make meaning out of the text, and, you know, if they're in class with you, you're supporting them in that process, right? So I think it doesn't require them to have to produce a lot of speech themselves. They can think about it, they can put different elements together to create their book snap, and then it just gets shared out, you know, through your class, whatever format you're using online, if that's how you're doing it.
Shaylee, one of the things that strikes me about Booksnaps is how social and kid-friendly it seems as a format to use. I'm wondering if teachers have not experimented with anything like this before, what would be some, I guess, maybe preparation steps they would need to think through with how to set up routines with their students, or maybe some of those scaffolding activities, ways to start small, but that would prepare them toward using Booksnaps authentically?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, my mind goes to that one thing that we do with our students when we're reading is to have them identify an important quote. And that's kind of the first step in my mind if I'm going to make a book snap, is what quote, what lines from the text, or what graphic or image do I want to highlight? And once I've identified that, then why is it that I'm picking that one out? What is it that I'm connecting to? Is it answering a question that I've had? So what can I say about it then, so that there's some kind of a response from me? But I also like that you can just put in a lot of different visuals to kind of symbolize what the meaning is to you, or why it's important or significant. You know, I think your point about kids being more like kind of in tune with the social media already, like Snapchat and Bitmojis, I'm sure they already have an idea of what's available in Bitmoji world. And for me, I'm like, give me one about reading, and like 2 things pop up, because that's not such a huge Bitmoji kind of topic. But yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really manageable.
Yeah. One more comment from Carol on the YouTube comments. She's asking or mentioning Flipgrid. And I think Flipgrid would be a great tool to layer in, because you could have students kind of showing from the book and talking about it. So that could be one way. And then if they're going to make an actual book snap, maybe some kids, of course, it's easier for them to talk about something than it is to try to write it down. So it's kind of catering to where their strengths are in terms of where you have them start first, right? Flipgrid's kind of a newer thing since I actually left the classroom. So, but I would love to go back and do more with kids using Flipgrid, talking about books. And because when you post to a Flipgrid, I don't know what it's called, but a topic, other people can respond back to your topic. So that I think will help us get at some of that interactivity that I'm shooting for. So let me just quickly review outcomes. I see we're coming close to our time. Thinking for you, which text responses that I just was showing seemed most authentic and engaged? And I kind of told you where I landed on it, but maybe you were seeing some things that didn't stand out as much to me, or you're thinking of it in a little different way. And then which social media tools are you most interested in using for connecting with texts? And Carol Sava's given us Flipgrid as one other tool that we could certainly be using. How about either of you? You guys want to chime in before we kind of wrap up here?
Yeah, I would just add a yes to Flipgrid. I think that students and our students have done something like a podcast similar. They didn't use Flipgrid. They were hesitant with the video aspect of it, but reviewing books, pitching it to others, giving them student voice, and then having those students as a community be suggesting books to each other could also be really powerful.
I agree.
Yeah, I like Booksnaps. I'm going to try that out. I think it would be a lot of fun to teach the teachers and then the kids as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for the session today. As I mentioned, you can tweet at me, HSESL teacher, hashtag MadPD, and finally credits for Slide Carnival. And we'll wrap up there at that point if I can figure out how to close the video. No, I didn't do it right. Stop broadcast. There we go.